Alright guys, you might know my channel for spending days in the shop. I take you along to work with me, fixing cars all week, but I don't seem to get enough. I got a project truck. If you haven't seen those videos, I believe there's 104 videos on this truck. I bought it was a total basket case, thinking in a few months I'd have it running and driving, taking it to Old Town and local shows for fun. It turned out to be about 4 times rustier than I expected, so I had to go through the whole truck top to bottom. The hood is the only component I didn't have to refabricate. Go check those out if you want to see and get caught up on what this truck's been through. So needless to say, I put a Blueprint 383 in there because I had enough. I wanted an engine I knew would perform. It comes with a good warranty. The problem is, it's got a Holley carburetor on it. And if you've seen that video, I went through the Holley carburetor. Didn't work. So the carburetor is apparently porous. The casting is porous. Let's go take a look at that. Oh, kind of gave it away. The carburetor is porous. I put a new power valve, new gaskets, all that kind of thing. But I'm not sure if that you can see that, but there's actually droplets of fuel in the carburetor throat. And when I took it off my engine, there was droplets of fuel in the manifold. And I had just redone that carburetor and changed all my fouled spark plugs out, looking to avoid further trouble. Runs a lot better without the fouled spark plugs, but the carburetor's still leaking down in the primary bowl no matter what I do. I'm basically over it, kind of motivated right now and excited. People have been telling me, oh, it's a needle and seat, but a needle and seat only stops the flow of extra fuel because the fuel pump keeps trying to push fuel. Needle and seat shuts that off, so the carburetor doesn't overfill and spill over. But what's happening with this is, with the fuel at the correct level, it just leaks down when the carburetor sits. New gaskets and power valve had no effect. It's got to have a porous carburetor body. But that carburetor came with on the Blueprint 383 I put in the truck. I'm going to have to contact them. Maybe I can get the carburetor warranted at least and have a new carburetor in case the system I'm about to put on the truck gives me trouble. What we're going to do in this video is try to get this truck running right. We're going to put an ACES fuel injection system on it called the KILLSHOT. Lots of videos online about them. A lot of people get them for free and make videos about it. And you'll see they have banners and the t-shirts and all the stickers all over the place. That's not what this video is. I bought it. I'm going to tell you what I think about it. And some people have trashed them, some people love them. So it's 50-50. Stay tuned if you want to see what happens in this video, because we're going to do an install, do a little bit of tweaking, and an initial start. Should be fun. Let's get to it. It's wet with gas, so I'm tired of dealing with the dinosaur technology. I know a lot of people love carburetors and they think I'm stupid for putting fuel injection on a truck, but that's what we're going to do. We got the ACES kit, not sponsored. I bought it myself because I thought it looked cool. Since I do drivability and electrical stuff all the time, I'm not intimidated by it at all. It's actually a very simple system. Throttle body like they used in the 80s on GM cars. Uses a GM style pump, GM TPS, GM style injectors, but they are 100-pound injectors, so it can support up to 650 horsepower. I did buy an Evil Energy 10 micron fuel filter, bracket. I bought a fuel line kit, which looks exactly like what you get from them. When you buy this from ACES, it's a $300 and some odd kit, but this was 60 bucks and this was 110 on Amazon. I believe it's even the same brand. If you look at it really closely, it looks the same. I don't know. In any event, I got the in-tank fuel pump. We're going to be good with that. This thing comes with a pretty cool handheld screen. Some people go to the 7-inch. I think the 5-inch one's big enough. I mean, it's bigger than my cell phone. I don't know why it would have to be bigger than that. Standalone module. Everyone makes a big deal that it's not on the throttle body. I guess that's a good thing. But a lot of cars, the computers are in the engine compartment really close to the engine and stuff, and it doesn't seem to hurt them. I didn't buy it because of that, although I guess it's good. It's one less potential problem. I did get a high voltage, high amperage relay kit. All of these things don't come with this set. I got the fuel pump, the KILLSHOT, throttle body, and that stuff. All this is separate. You can get it from ACES, but I bought my own stuff. I put a fuel pump block off plate down here. So I've removed my fuel pump already. Had an Edelbrock fuel pump on it, which this fuel pump's got 25-30 miles on it and maybe a couple hours of runtime. That's the original block-up plate, the original push rod. The air cleaner is going to fit on this. I've already cut the threaded rod to make sure it's going to fit. Let's stop babbling and get to work. I've been working for a little while you guys are charging. You look tired. So I pulled 2 planks off my bed rather than dropping the tank, so I can pull that cover off. We're going to drill a hole in it and mount the fuel pump there. That's the fuel feed line that I have in the truck now. We're going to replace all that with that braided kit that I bought. So let's go ahead and get it out of there. I got to clean some of this up so we don't get dirt in the tank. We'll start getting this apart. Matter of fact, it's not going to be too exciting. It's just a bunch of little Allen bolts. You pull that out. When we come back, we'll be putting a hole in it so we can mount our fuel pump. You guys take a little rest. We'll be right back. This here is the part that I took out of the Boyd's fuel tank. Just take those bolts out of there, and then you got to pop it off the rubber gasket. So I plan on modifying this so that I can install this. This is going to go in place of that center thing. This disc is evenly drilled, so it doesn't matter where it faces. I'll be able to, I got to get this out of here so I can set this on. I got to do a 2 1/8 inch hole with a hole saw, but in order to do that, I got to mess up their beautiful, I mean, that Boyd's tank is so nice. It was. Now it's sitting under my truck getting a little nasty, but what a beautiful piece they make. They didn't get, that wasn't a sponsored item either, that gas tank I bought. I wanted to take the tank out of the cab to have more room in the cab and a little more safety. But I'll tell you what, if you want a nice gas tank, Boyd's Machining, they make a nice gas tank. Try to get this piece out if I can without completely destroying everything. I am going to have to destroy this plate, but I don't want to destroy this component. Maybe it could be welded back in someday if I wanted to go back to a pump. I probably could also pull fuel right through this, but we'll cross that bridge when we get to. We're going to hope this ACES KILLSHOT works. I've got my manifold drying out a little bit. So when I pulled that carburetor off of there was wet gas in the manifold on both sides. So I left it open. It's been about 2 hours. I've been tinkering, taking the fuel pump off and getting my batteries all charged. So I think this thing's ready to be set on there now. That way the system's not all wide open anyway. I'm gonna go back to ported vacuum. I had it on manifold vacuum just to try to get it to run with the carburetor. When you have it on manifold vacuum, it'll advance the timing at idle and bring in some more timing to get a cleaner burn at idle, so you don't get as much of that Holley carburetor smell out of the exhaust. Anyone who tunes carburetors will tell you that's normal. But every time my car goes by us at Old Town, my wife will say, "Why does it smell like that?" I say, "Holley carburetor." Anyway, but I'm going to go back to ported vacuum, which is actually more efficient, theoretically. Everyone's got different theories. I'm going to go back to ported vacuum since the fuel injection should keep it from smelling in an idle, right? So I think this port back here is ported vacuum. This one here is manifold, and these two are manifold. I'm going to hook my booster to one of these, my PCV to one of these, and my fuel line's probably going to go in the back. It'll come up the wheel well to the back port, I believe, is what I'm going to do. I'll have to see. This should be my ignition feed. It was from the choke. I got to make sure that it has 12 volts key on and cranking. If it doesn't, I'll have to find a different wire. You have to hook this to the tack negative. So I'm hoping that even if this loses 12 volts cranking, it'll pick up a tack signal and keep the injectors firing. We'll see. First, I'm going to try to find a wire that's got 12 volts cranking and running. Let's get to that fuel pump modification. One thing I can tell you is if you don't have a 2 1/8 inch hole saw because you brought your metalworking tools home a couple weeks ago and you forgot that you brought them home, so then what you end up having to do is use a drill bit, step drill, or whatever you have. I like the step drill because it chamfers the edge. Spare batteries for your power tool, aluminum cutting bits. I didn't use that, I took it out of it. And then a round file. And you can drill your holes, and what I did was very painful, so I didn't want to put you through it. I drilled holes all the way around and then used my aluminum bit to hog them out. That's why I'm wearing my face shield, because when you use this thing, you put your face back as far as you want. Those little metal chips go for 3, 4, 5, 6 feet away. And we cleaned it up. I'm going to test fit it now and make sure it works. It's kind of rough. I'm going to make it a little bit nicer, but I want to make sure the fuel pump fits in it first. We should be good. Let's go take a look. All right, I got my adapter plate. It's actually bigger than it has to be, but that's because I went by this, I used this piece of foam, I Sharpied around it, and then I hogged it out to where the Sharpie was. It's not perfectly round, but my eyes aren't perfectly straight either. That's fine. I'm not trying to win the Riddler Award. I'm trying to get my truck to Old Town. All right, I've got my holes drilled, and I don't have a drill press. This is a repair shop, not a machine shop. If you work in a repair shop that has a drill press, you're probably doing a lot of hot rod stuff like this. We really should have one because I need it. In any event, some of the holes are a little off center because I eyeballed them with a Sharpie mark, and to get it to fit, I just rechecked my marks to see how far off everything was when the bolts wouldn't go through, and then I just used my drill bit to kind of bring the holes towards where they needed to be because I didn't use a drill press that wasn't spot on. Ideally, you want to set this thing, clamp this thing down, use a hole punch to mark the holes, use a drill press, it'll be perfect. You won't have to deal with that. That's just how I do it when I have to make things work. Now I'm going to test fit this thing. The bolts are all straight now, so even though it is snug in the plate, it still should be, yeah. Yep, so it sits on there nice and flush, won't have any problems with that. I do have to put my foam gasket on it and all that kind of stuff. I'm going to set my depth. My tank is 9.5 inches deep, so I got to set this at about 9 inches, maybe 9.25 total length. We'll take some measurements, figure out where we're going to put our pump. The pump is going to be, they want you to heat this, heat the tubing, press it on the pump, and put a clamp on it. Same thing on the top, heat it, press it onto the module, and put a clamp on it. You got to set your length. So all I want is 9.5 inches total. This foam gasket is going to compress all the way, almost all the way. It'll leave probably about 1/8 inch or so. So I'm going to have 1/8 inch of margin. I'm going to cut this right here, and then I know when I get my fuel pump and everything done, the sock should be about there because that's going to be within my 1/2 inch or so of touching the tank. We don't want it on the bottom of the tank. We want it just off the tank. So if you do get any sediment in there over time, the sock's not sitting down in the sediment, it's just barely up. This is why, it's another reason why you don't run your gas gauge all the way down to eighth of a tank or less. Even in a modern car, same kind of thing. It always picks up from that area, but when the fuel goes below that sock, that's when you start to get stumbles and bogs and go around turns and the engine stalls. Then you bring it to a mechanic to try to find out why, because you're out of gas. Let's do some measuring and some cutting. We'll get this all fit. Using a heat gun, got this on. It started out straight. I didn't heat it too much. Kind of strange that it just kind of was crooked. When I pushed it on, it was crooked. But I'm changing the tie wraps out. The tie wraps they give you are just about the cheapest tie wraps I've ever seen. So I've got some better tie wraps going on it. I got to put the return tube on, which it's kind of strange. I thought this was returnless, but I don't know. Got my flush cut. Not that anyone's going to get cut by something that's in the gas tank, but I still feel better about it. That's set to right about the right depth. And the foam's on there, it's going to raise it up a little bit. So it's going to end up about there. Right around 9.25, 9.5, which is what the tank depth is. This is also set to about the depth of the tank. They want it within 1/2 inch of the bottom of the tank. So we'll put a little heat in that. Should still be pretty tough to get it on there, but I'm going to put a clamp on it. You shouldn't need to. It's a return line. Matter of fact, I don't know if I can. Oh yeah, okay, there it is. Also, make sure you have metric tools because the clamps that it comes with are 6mm. At least the first one was. Let's see what size this one is. Yeah, 6mm instead of 1/4. Another thing I realized I'm going to need is, I was hoping it would come with some of these caps, because any openings in the system that you're not going to run a line to, you need capped. And this one is what we're going to run our fuel lines to. This is all AN6 or 6AN, however you want to say it. I guess I could use this tie wrap to hold the return line kind of somewhere close to the bracket. Everything is clamped up, electrical connector. It's going to be a tight squeeze. If this was in the tank already, I'm kind of glad that my setup is going to do this. Because if you had to do this in a tank and feed this up, they want you to feed this through the hole and fish it around and pull the bolts up through the holes that you drill. So you better have your holes drilled spot on, or make them a little larger like I did. I would assume you could make a piece of coat hanger and bend it so that it kind of hooks it from underneath and it won't fall into the tank, because then you'll be trying to fish it out of the tank. No videos I saw showed this process, probably because there's a lot of fumbling and figuring and recalculating. And you can't put the sock on later in most gas tanks. I can do it in my setup, but I wanted to see what people have to do to get theirs done. Man, that is a tight squeeze. This is smaller hole than the hole I made. The hole I made isn't the problem. It's the hole they want you to get it all through is pretty small. There is a different sock too. The smaller sock, it comes with a second, where'd I put it? There it is. It comes with a much smaller one that'll probably be a lot easier to get in, but this is a better sock. It's a much finer mesh than this one. Wow. That's supposed to be in the gas tank. The little notch right here in the red part is helping me get some of this stuff through. Make sure not to pinch any wires. Now it doesn't matter how I face it in my setup, because I can turn this anywhere. All these holes are symmetrical like I mentioned earlier. To get these buttoned up, we'll go over and get it back in my tank. Then I'm going to, oh, you know what, I'm going to put the O-rings on there too. They give you O-rings. That the O-rings are for when you mount it screws from above and you already have the factory mounting holes in your gas tank, because these fit the early gas tanks. But they show the O-rings going from this way, going from up this way. They show the O-ring on top under the nut. All right, let me get my nuts all over this thing. Got my O-rings on. These are 8mm or 5/16. I was hoping to get this all done in one day, one video. But what it may be is 2 days, one video. I am going to go start to finish in this video. But it's a little after 2 o'clock. I got here at 10:30. So we're 3.5 hours in. I didn't film the part where I was taking the fuel pump and the carburetor off and taking the wood bed out, or the bed wood out. It's straight underneath. It's not straight on the foam, so I must have to tighten these some more. Felt like they were close. Looks like this is going to be pretty close to the surface too. I guess if it was a gas tank, it'd be the same way. Now, one thing makes me a little sad. I thought I was buying a returnless fuel pump to go in the tank, but this system has to have a return. It must be the full-size one is returnless and this one isn't, but I'm not sure. I picked this one just knowing that I could modify this to install it inside it. I wasn't sure if the other one would fit in this cover or what. I didn't want to have to modify the tank. So I got it mostly because of this. The return thing's not a big deal. I just thought it was going to be returnless. But it does say exceeds 60 psi. So if you're using it with EFI, you have to have a regulator to bring it down to about 48, I believe is what they want on these. It's 45 to 48, I have to look. But 60 psi is going to be too much. So I won't be able to get it lean enough. It'll stay too rich, which that's not what I want. That's what the carburetor did. I'm starting to get my relay stuff together, my wiring, get my fittings, figure out what I'm going to do with that. I think I'm going to do it. A return line is going to have a slight bend, and the pressure line will be straight. And then on the throttle body, same thing. The front one's going to have a slight bend, and the back one will be straight. We can make some lines. I got 26 feet of 3/8. It's just under 3/8 actually, which if you think about it, it's not that big of a deal. You can see the size of the orifice in that fitting. And supposedly it can handle up to 650 horsepower, which this engine's about 450, 460. It's not anywhere near the threshold anyway. That's why I got the 255 gallon per hour pump, or liter per hour pump, which is about 80 or so, I guess. This set came with the blocks for doing them in a vise, mounting these in a vise without doing any damage to the fittings, which honestly, I don't care if there's a couple scratches on them. It's not going to be a show truck. Just trying to figure out if I wanted to get the hoses on it first or not. They're gonna have to be accessible. However I point this, I think I'm probably gonna put it slightly at a slight angle like this. I guess I'll go ahead and drop this in before and we'll hook the lines up after. I want the lines to be removable anyway, so I gotta make sure I can get them on and off without having to take the whole thing apart, right? I'm gonna do that next. All right, we're making some calculations. I don't think I'm gonna have enough fuel line, but I know I need a regulator and I know I need a little more fuel line probably. It's going to be close for sure. The return line and pressure line are going to be the same size, which is what you basically want with this system apparently. So, but all we have to do is build some AN lines right now. You take the fitting, put it over your braided line. Also, don't cut these with like a hacksaw or anything like that. I usually wrap them with some masking tape and then use a cutoff wheel. And watch your face, obviously. There's metal in these braided lines. That's how they're so strong and durable. So you got to be careful. But I find cutting it with a cutoff wheel is the best. This set I got does come with a tool to help you with installing the ferrule. And the ferrule is what you squeeze to collapse this nylon tube inside. You want to go all the way until the nylon inside there is at the end of that ferrule. There's a shoulder inside. A little more. That's good. Now this tube will go inside there, and it's a tight squeeze also. That's what these are for. If you can't get that in by hand, you mount these in a vise, squeeze it like that, and force the hose down into it. And once you've got everything seated correctly, then it's a matter of tightening this on the end of that fitting. Everything's lined up correctly, it should go. And this will turn until everything's all seated and tightened up. Definitely one of those things you want to start by hand. And then I have a 18-19 Slim that I can use. Some of these fittings have really not much of room in between when you're tightening them up, so you have to have these fittings, these wrenches to fit in between, or the special AN wrenches. The set came with a wrench for the big nuts, but it's way too wide to fit in some of these straight ones that have a shallow nut on them. These angled fittings have a much bigger nut, so it's a little easier to get to. So we'll get this tightened up, we'll start running some lines. I noticed too that these are 18 millimeter and these are 19. So I have this Capri set that works for both. It's 18 on one and 19 on the other, like they did it on purpose. You tighten these all the way till they're just about flush. The line's spinning down below. You're basically getting that ferrule to lock down on that piece of nylon, which is what the hose is. The nylon is the strength of the hose that keeps the fuel from leaking. This is for abrasion. The metal and cloth outside here is just for abrasion. Keeps it from expanding. It expands, but it limits how much it can expand, let's put it that way. There you go. Clean that off if you care about how pretty it is. Now I can attach these to the lines. I'm going to put the return and pressure on the tank, then we'll lift it up from underneath and we'll work on getting this all the length. Of course, we're going to have a filter in the pressure line. That's the filter, showing you, give you an idea how they want you to lay it out. I generally put the filter closer to the back too. All right, fuel filter's in, fittings are tight. I got to clean up these lines a little bit. The hoses came with some brackets, but the brackets are a little loose on the lines. Kind of disappointed in that. So I'm going to probably get some better ones. I got to mount this so that it clears the suspension, clears the bed, and if the bed flexes and all that kind of thing, you got to keep all that stuff in mind. I got this in a safe place, opposite of the muffler. If something does leak someday, of course I'm going to check it when I first do it, and then you have, every once in a while when you do an oil change or whatever, you got to look around. If something does leak, it's not spraying right on my exhaust. Yeah, I would definitely never mount this over here. I got my hoses wrapped up going up to the firewall. I'm going to need some, like I said, some brackets to hold them, standoffs to hold those lines a little better. For now, we're trying to see if we have enough hose and what else we might need to order. Keep in mind, some of these lines, when I cut them with the die grinder, I put electrical tape on it. I mentioned that earlier, but the die grinder is not completely straight all the time, I'm noticing. So I'll go through with my snips and make sure I get the line perfectly square. It's got to be 90 degrees. When you push the ferrule on, that line has to be, the nylon should be touching all the way around that fitting. Make sure you get a good connection, it doesn't come apart on you. When you get it right, this tool helps spread the nylon inside and get it completely seated all the way up against the shoulder, all the way around. Now this has got to get pushed into that nylon. This might be repetitive, but it's something that I just noticed. Some of them, when I'm looking at them, they're not square. So a lot of people will get their lines set to the length they want, take them back out to do these on the workbench or a vise. That's what, like I said, those adapters are for, a vise. But with a good shove, you can get it to go together. Just pay attention that that nylon is seated all the way. Just getting this nut started on the fitting can sometimes be a chore as well. You don't want to use any power tools for that. Not until you got at least a couple threads. If you watch my day in the shop videos, I probably harp on it a little too often, but start threads with power tools, you usually end up making more work for yourself. You get lucky quite a few times. 7 out of 10 times, it'll be perfect. Those other 3, boy, that's tough. Well, I'm running out of hose, and I need a regulator. So we're going to order some stuff so we can finish this up. And then this hose is going to go to the regulator. I'm going to mount that right here, and then we're going to make a little hose go into that. Alright guys, I'm going to start mounting this wiring. I haven't got my fuel lines in yet, but I'm going to mount the wiring in the PCM. I was going to put the PCM inside, but the way ACES pre-made the harness, I could cut the whole thing open and reroute everything. I just don't want to. I don't think it's really necessary, but all my wires that they want directly to the battery are right here coming out of the harness facing the PCM. So it makes sense to me to put it here. It's in an enclosed case. The battery's not going to hurt it, gases or any of that. I'm also going to mount my relays up on the fender well, mount these fuses up on the fender well, some self-tapping screws. For the PCM, what I like to do is I'll put some paint on the bottom of these. This is just some random touch-up paint I have laying around with a quite sketchy brush. Put a drop on each stud, won't hurt anything. Might dry kind of quick. I put it where I want it, and then touch it down. Now I got 4 paint marks. Boom. When you do this kind of thing, obviously you got to get to the back of it to tighten the nuts. I would use a, if you get these with a hole in the center, instead of a stud like this, this has a stud and a screw. You can get it with a hole in it too if you have a blind area you want to mount it, and use a self-tapping screw. This truck's handy because there's so many panels you can access the back. Just keep that in mind when you decide where you're going to mount yours. These are lock nuts, so once they're snug, a little bump more, good. I don't want to break my insulators, that's for sure. Mounted solid. I'm going to get some self-tappers. We'll get these relays and fuse holders in place next. Now, these should kind of lend themselves wherever they feel relaxed. I might cross them, I might do this. Got some self tappers with a 5/16 head, 8mm. Now you could just get this all started and running without having these things mounted and all, but I found over the course of my career that nothing is more permanent than temporary wiring. So I'm gonna hope this ACES system works. I've seen mixed reviews, but if it does have a problem, I think we'll be able to figure it out, I would hope. Be a little overconfident probably and get it mounted up. The only bad thing about these screws, they don't like being taken in and out repeatedly, because that cutting bit, it's not really designed for repeat use. So what I'll do is, if I do have to take them in and out again, then I'll just put small nuts and bolts the other way. You know what I mean? I think that's pretty good. It's almost like that's how they want you to do it, at least in my mind, the way that harness is wrapped. And I did take out some of the things, like I'm not using the coil drive, and I'm not using the magnetic distributor. I'm using my HEI. I'm going to hook it to the coil negative for the signal so the computer knows engine speed, which is this gray one. And then the orange one, I'm going to hook to my AC so it knows I turned on the AC compressor, because it'll control the idle speed. And when the idle speed drops with the compressor coming on, it's going to go, what's going on? So this just says that's the AC. It would probably work without that hooked up, but it might hunt a little more trying to figure out why the IAC changed so much. At least that's what I'm guessing they want you to do it for. I couldn't find out. I asked on a couple of their videos on YouTube, but they don't respond to many of their comments. Not like my channel. Getting them comments, I'll respond. I started taping this up too. I trimmed all the wires I'm not using, but I left them in here so they're accessible. Someday if I want to go back in, pull up my wiring diagram, see which color's what, and I can do whatever I want with nitrous or fans, which my fans, I have the Delta Pag fan set up. It's got its own module. I'm not going to use this. This is the point where I'm going to stop today and wait till I get my fuel regulator and those lines mounted before I go any further. I'm going to hook up the power and ground last. Some wiring. Of course they're green and orange. It doesn't match. That's alright. I'll get over it. Green is what the compressor wire colors are. So my thought is it's orange on the ACES fuel injection end and green on the compressor end. Plus I'm going to leave this label not shrink wrapped that says compressor input. Little shrink tubing. Then I'm going to tie wrap this wire and tidy up that bundle a little bit, make it look a little prettier. Perfection is not what I'm after. I've mentioned probably once or twice, but I want it to look reasonable. I want it to look decent. Once I figure out all my wiring, and I'm going to get this semi-permanent, and then eventually I'm going to put convoluted tubing over all of it, or wrap it all. Once I get everything buttoned up 100% and working, I'm doing the wiring 95% for now, and then I'll finish the last little bit up afterwards. I don't believe in just laying everything on the engine and starting it up. I think it's got to at least be reasonably done. Some goodies came in. One thing you got to be careful of, I notice on these, is all of these lines are not the same size, so make sure you get ones that come with fittings. This looks like a 5/16 line, but I measured it. It's in between 5/16 and 3/8. But look at these fittings in comparison to these fittings. They're about the same size. These don't use ferrules, and these use ferrules on the hose. So these are made for PTFE, and these are made for regular braided hose. So there is a difference. You got to be careful. Get the hose that goes with the fittings. I ordered this kit because I said, oh look, it's going to come with more fittings, and it was only a few dollars more than just getting the regulator. But it turns out I won't have a use for these unless I get regular braided hose. Start installing this thing, see if we can fire this thing up. Alright, I got the O2 sensor bung welded in. I put one of these anti-foulers in there just in case it might give it a little weird distortion or anything like that. But I gotta get the O2 sensor in here. I gotta find a ignition on feed that has 12 volts on crank and run, not just run. That's going to be the hard part. I checked my choke wire that I was using, but when you go to crank, it loses power. I'll have to look in the fuse panel for one. All right, guys, I've got this up. I'll go over some of the wiring and stuff with you in a second. I'm going through all the startup menu. It tells you first time. You want to go to the wizard. Yep. Then you run through your selections. Pick if you have mild, stock, race, cam. I put mild. My cam's like right in between mild and race, but it's a pretty big cam. So, but I'm going to go with mild, and it'll auto learn either way. You just want to be closer to your target for the auto learn. The rest of the selections are just telling it you have a kill shot. All of these selections you don't adjust because it has 4 injectors. They're 100-pound injectors each. My displacement is 377. It's called a 383, but it's not 30 over. I'm going to leave it at, well, I'm going to go to 875 just to, that seemed where it was happy with the carburetor. Here's my selection. Cam 102, kill shot, 4 injectors, 377. All pretty standard stuff. So are you sure you want to save? Yep. Now key off for 5 seconds to make it effective. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I hear my pump back there. I'm gonna go see, make sure I don't have any fuel leaks. Number one most important thing is not having fuel leaks. I got lights. Everything's nice and dry. I really wanted to put the regulator over there and have this return line shorter, but my immediate thought was the header is right under that. If this thing ever leaks, a gauge or a diaphragm or one of these lines loosens or whatever, it's going to put fuel right on my headers. I don't want to. So it's not as nice looking over there, but it seems safer to me, so I'd made that concession. I'm going to turn my fuel pump on and off a few times, get my fuel pressure up around 45, 46, and then we should be ready to fire this thing up. All right, guys, one of the things that you might have noticed yesterday, I was trying to get fuel pressure, but I had my regulator hooked up wrong. So last night I slept on it and realized that's the outlet. And when it said you can use any outlet, it meant any of these two for the pressure to come back to the regulator, and then to the tank has to go on the bottom. There's not options. So I just rerouted my hose a little bit. I got to restructure my clamps and security for the lines. I'm going to try to set the fuel pressure if I can get this thing to start up. Let's do that. First start. Check it for leaks too, obviously. I gotta lower that. That's the cold idle. There's all my data. Engine coolant temp, manifold, air temp, map sensor pressure, battery 14.8, IAC. The IAC is way open. I'm gonna let it warm up a little bit, and then I will raise the idle screw on the throttle body to lower that IAC. You want it between about 6 and 20 is the sweet spot. So while it's cold, you don't want to mess with it. I got to get that ECT over 160 or so, and then I can adjust it. But for right now, I'm going to finish getting the shop opened up. I don't want to let this run in the closed shop till all our doors are open. We're going to do some more tuning on this thing before we end the video. All right, guys, let's go over some things on this setup. It's running great, by the way. There's a few things I've learned. One is, anytime you adjust this base idle screw or this base idle screw, the secondaries and primaries, anytime you adjust them, you're reducing the amount the IAC has to do to keep it idling in the sweet spot. So you want that base idle just low enough that the IAC is between 5 and 20 counts. But what happens is, when you do adjust it, now the TPS, throttle position sensor, is higher than 0. So it thinks you're off idle. And so it might be erratic, the idle. So you need to go in and relearn your TPS, which is in this. I'll show you that in the tool in a second. Also wanted to point out that the way I had to wire this, because these old trucks, they're not really good with ignition power during cranking and running. You usually get one or the other, but this does luckily have aftermarket wiring, and the coil gets power cranking and running. But you can't run coil power to the module for key on. So what I did is I used the coil power to turn on the relay. And I got to clean this wiring up still, but this relay goes directly to the battery, and it has I put a 10 amp fuse in the fuse holder. It's probably way too much. The ECM wouldn't like anything more than an amp or two, but anyway, this relay is grounded, and the power comes from the brown wire, goes to the coil positive, triggers the relay, sends battery voltage to the PCM, so it's clean power. I got my power and ground right at the battery. I got this lead that energizes it at the battery, activated by ignition at the coil. Hope that makes sense. This is the relay I bought thinking I needed to buy a relay, because they mentioned a fuel pump relay wire, which is actually direct to the fuel pump. It has its own fuel pump relay. And at first I was concerned about the length, and then I realized every General Motors and Ford truck on earth has the PCM up front, and the fuel pump wires run all the way to the back, so that's not a big deal. I did use very heavy gauge wires, you can see for this. That's what goes back to my fuel pump. I want to say this is 12 gauge. Could be 10, I have to measure it. I forget what it was. I grabbed it because I had it in bulk. I also modified my Holley return spring bracket. The spring that comes on the throttle body isn't quite hefty enough, and I did a little test out in the parking lot this morning, and when I let off the gas, the idle was high, and I think the throttle wasn't coming all the way back to idle, so I just put one spring on it. It feels nice right now. It was a little too stiff before with 2 springs with the Holley carburetor, but now it feels really good. Everything's working well. I'm not sure if there's anything else I could point out for you. I mentioned this morning, which is earlier in the video, how those fuel pressure regulators tell you can use any port you want. That's not true. The bottom one's got to go back to the tank. You can use either of the 2 side ones to go from the throttle body back through to the tank. I tidied up my wiring a bit. Still not perfect, but much better. I've got some holders holding the harness up, where another thing I wanted to point out that I'm not sure they mention ever in the instructions, but because the engine shakes and vibrates and moves, I have pretty solid mount. I have urethane mounts on this, but especially if you have rubber mounts, it's more critical. You want to allow everything to move. You got to have a little play in your harness, a little play in your hoses. Everything here is able to move. If it had to move a ½ inch or an inch or whatever, it wouldn't be a big deal. If you've got something tight, if you have that harness tight on there and it moves, it can cause electrical concerns, connection issues, and stuff like that. So let's take a look at that TPS reset. I'm going to tuck this cord up once I get done tweaking on this a little more. We'll turn the key on, get our screen up. Now the IAC is at 134, that's maxed out. I want to see let's see what this does. GPS signal weak, RPM. Let's do Wizard, TPS, yes. Make sure the throttle is closed and engine is not started. Now this is the point where I'm sitting here wondering if it's doing something for me or not, because I just push yes and it sits here. Make sure the throttle is closed and engine is not started. Now go back to my main screen. great. It's running really good. I don't want to run it too much. I've got all the doors closed in here. Basically, we're closed up for the day. But I did want to finalize this video for anyone thinking about putting one of these fuel injection system on their car. Now, I'm not going to tell you already that this thing is awesome. It's never going to give me a problem. But I will tell you the installation went smoothly. Very straightforward, not very complicated. The only issue I had was having my regulator plumbed wrong, or I would have been able to start it yesterday. I was here till 9 o'clock at night. I think I mentioned that earlier too, but super cool kit for the money. I paid $850 with the in-tank fuel pump setup. Limited space one I bought because that way I knew it would fit my tank easier. But the bigger one, if you have the room, the bigger one's nice. It has a regulator in it, so you don't have to run any regulator. It's internally regulated. So, in any event, I hope you enjoyed this video. It was not sponsored. This is all paid for stuff. It's not a, I just think the product's pretty good value for the money. Half the price of the Holley stuff. So far, so good. And I will keep you posted. We'll do updates every few months to let you know how it's doing. Torque the like button before you head out. I'd really appreciate that. Subscribe if you're new. We just went over 23,000 subscribers. The support's been great. Most of that's from my day in the shop videos, and I do a lot of silly shorts having some fun. So, any event, hope I see you in one of those videos, because you're awesome.